There are labs out there right now, practically setting tens of thousands of dollars on fire. Imagine spending months of agonizing effort rolling out a brand new software system, only for your highly trained QC team to secretly go right back to using paper and Excel spreadsheets. It sounds absolutely absurd, right? But it happens a lot more than you might think. There is this massive, unspoken friction in the industry between the management who buys the software and the lab technicians who ultimately abandon it. So let's dive into this explainer and investigate the real reason why digital transformation is dying inside your quality control lab. We're going to look closely at why standard rollouts fail and how a totally different approach, specifically from LIMS, can actually fix this dynamic in just 4 weeks. To truly wrap our heads around the scale of this problem, let's look at some real-world data from our source material. A global biotech company recently rolled out a supposedly feature-rich LIMS, and despite abundant training, endless meetings, and a massive budget, user adoption stalled at a catastrophic 5%. They just went right back to paper. Just 5%. I mean, imagine the destroyed return on investment on a multi-million-dollar system where 95% of the users refuse to even touch it. So why does an expensive, supposedly time-saving tool fail so spectacularly? Well, if you look closely, the warning signs are literally everywhere. Hop onto any industry forum and it's just filled with lab professionals sharing absolute nightmare scenarios. They're constantly complaining about steep learning curves where doing something as basic as printing a single sample label means you have to navigate through 5 different screens. As one totally frustrated reviewer summed it up perfectly, these systems are simply not intuitive at all. In a high-pressure lab where speed and precision are everything, a clunky interface isn't just a minor annoyance, it is a massive operational hazard. When a tech is fighting the software just to log a sample, the software itself becomes the enemy. Section 1. The LIMS Adoption Nightmare. We usually love to blame the lab staff for this adoption nightmare. The knee-jerk reaction from management is usually, oh, the technicians are just being stubborn, or they inherently hate change. But our investigation reveals something quite different. Their resistance is actually a completely rational response to terrible software implementation. Look at the 2026 State of Lab Digitalization report. They surveyed 110 different labs. Staff resistance is tied as the number 2 barrier stalling digital progress at 21%, sitting right alongside strict regulatory constraints. It's a massive roadblock for sure, but treating the staff as the problem completely misses the root cause. Section 2. The true cause of resistance. Okay, so here's the crucial point. When adoption fails, the industry's default answer is always generic training. Management just throws more e-learning modules and mandatory webinars at the team and hopes it sticks. But the research shows that's actually making the problem significantly worse. You can't train someone on a generic template when their daily reality involves highly specialized, complex physical workflows. Compare that traditional nightmare against the one LIMS method. The one LIMS approach flips the script by mapping your actual lab workflows before any software is even touched. No generic templates. It relies entirely on an on-site LabCheck that maps your exact day-to-day reality. Independent experts strongly agree that mapping the lab first is absolutely crucial. It's the one thing that transforms a generic, painful rollout into a system the team actually recognizes as their own. Just look at this insight from Gerard Ibskamp, a LIMS consultant with over 20 years of experience. He says, you have to know what your processes are before the vendor's in the room. That is so foundational. If the vendor's in the room too early, they end up dictating the workflow based on their software's limitations rather than your lab's strengths. And that top-down dictation, that is exactly what breeds the fierce user resistance we were just talking about. Section 3. The process-first paradigm shift. Let's look at how this process-first paradigm completely shifts the implementation timeline and the whole user experience. A 3 to 12-month rollout filled with scope creep and a super stressful go-live is basically the industry standard right now. It exhausts the team before they even log in. One LIMS, however, targets full onboarding in just 1 month. Now, I know going from a year down to 1 month sounds almost unbelievable, but it works because they aren't building a giant bloated system from scratch. They match the configuration strictly to the reality you already mapped out, push it live, and then refine it iteratively from there. And here's where the daily friction just vanishes for the user. In a typical generic system, everyone gets the exact same complicated dashboard. It's messy, it's overwhelming, but one LIMS utilizes strict, highly targeted role-based access. Think about the logic for a second. A technician scanning incoming samples shouldn't have to scroll past managerial compliance reports just to do their job. With role-based access, they see exactly what they need for their specific tasks and absolutely nothing else. It totally declutters the experience.
Now, this seamless user experience doesn't just happen by accident. It is meticulously built on a 4-step LabCheck workshop that's based on Lean Six Sigma methodology. And just as a quick refresher, Lean Six Sigma is a global gold standard for eliminating waste and optimizing efficiency. This process breaks the transition down into 4 super clear stages. Evaluate the existing process, optimize out the hidden inefficiencies, analyze the financial viability of the changes, and finally, plan the exact roadmap. It basically takes all the guesswork out of the transition.
Section 4. Micarna Group's transformation. To see exactly how this process catches the true culprit of software resistance, let's look at an amazing real-world example from our source material. We're looking at Switzerland's largest meat, poultry, and seafood producer, the Micarna Group. Before their transformation, Micarna Group was absolutely drowning in a sea of paper and Excel spreadsheets. Just do the math on this. 100 to 200 physical samples processed daily, serving 23 different corporate stakeholders, all managed by just 3 extremely stressed technicians. Entirely on paper. It was a chaotic environment where things could easily slip through the cracks. So former head lab manager Stefania Cesarano brought in LIMS to digitize this whole overwhelming process. Rather than attempting a disastrous 23-site rollout all at once, which, by the way, is a classic trap that leads straight back to that 5% adoption rate we talked about, they took a much smarter approach. They spent month 1 simply mapping the reality of the lab. Then they deployed a pilot program at a single main site in Cortopin. This was brilliant. It created a safe sandbox to test features, catch issues early, and win over skeptical staff. Because they built it around the lab's actual workflow, they achieved instant, seamless adoption, even from veteran staff members who were previously really uncomfortable with computers. The resulting metrics were nothing short of staggering. First off, sample intake time dropped from taking up to 5 hours a day down to just 2. Data management became 50% faster across the board. And most impressively, their overall sample throughput increased by a massive 50 to 60%. Let that sink in. What does a 50 to 60% throughput increase actually mean for the bottom line of a major national producer like Micarna? It's a game changer. Reclaiming all that time allowed their technicians to introduce advanced analytical techniques that literally weren't possible when they were buried under mountains of paperwork. It completely changed their day-to-day reality. Going from 5 hours of exhausting paperwork to simply using a scanner perfectly solves the frustration we looked at earlier. Stefania noted that the tedious back-and-forth communication was just instantly eliminated. As she put it, all I had to do was scan the QR codes on the labels. On top of that, heavy compliance audits that used to be a dreaded nightmare became a total breeze. Independent accreditation assessors even flagged their clean, 2-click audit trails as exemplary for the industry. Section 5. Your lab in 4 weeks. The verdict of our investigation is crystal clear. Your team isn't stubborn, and they don't inherently hate new technology. They are just waiting for a tool that actually understands their workflow, rather than forcing them to adapt to some vendor's generic template. When you implement a LIMS built around the people who actually use it every single day, the outcome is incredible. Just look at these aggregate numbers. A drastically reduced human error rate, down by 87%, a 32% average increase in throughput, and massive annual quality savings approaching 50%. Connect that to your own operation. Ask yourself, what would a 50% cut in quality-related costs do for your lab's budget this year? The choice is ultimately yours. You can force another generic, bloated piece of software down your team's throat and hope for the best, though you'll likely end up right back on paper in 6 months. Or you can step back, book a process-first LabCheck workshop, map your reality, and let user adoption take care of itself. Will your team be fighting their software next month or doubling their throughput? Think about that for a second. Thanks for joining this explainer.